Okay, welcome everyone. Thanks for showing up. Just a quick verification of purpose. That way, if anybody's here for something that they think is not the thing that we're here for, I will only waste so much of your time. This is the Rulemaking Advisory Committee for proposed rulemaking to define the process for adopting the commercial and residential REACH code. Just to clarify, this is not about the content of the REACH code, but the process for adopting the REACH code. Just want to make sure that's clear up front. I'm going to start things off with some quick introductions. I'd just like to go down and everybody's here, introduce yourself, and if you are here on behalf of a specific organization, let us know. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go down my participation list online, and we also have someone here in the room, and because they're here in the room, I'm actually going to start with Jed.
Good morning, Andy. I'm Jed. Good morning, Andy. I'm Jed Sherman with the IATMO Group. Good morning, everybody else online.
Thank you, Jed. Now I'm just going to go down the list, which I think puts it in alphabetical order for me here. Brock Nation.
Morning, everyone. Brock Nation, Policy Director at Oregon Realtors.
Thanks, Brock. Ian Casey. We're not hearing anything from you, Ian. If you might be on mute. Oh no, now the mute sign's up there. So yeah, I'm not sure. We're not hearing anything from you.
Hello?
There we go.
Okay. Yeah, Ian Casey, Northwest Natural Consulting Engineer.
Thanks, Ian. Don McCordum.
Hi, Don McCordrum, representing Energy Trust of Oregon's EPS new construction program, here in a non-advocacy role to listen and observe. Thank you.
Thanks, Don. Sorry, I inverted the R on your name there. Kelly Thomas.
Kelly Thomas, Building Codes Division, Energy Policy Analyst.
Thanks, Kelly.
All the salt water, we just got period in there.
David Eslem.
David Heslom, Executive Director at Earth Advantage and Policy Committee Co-Chair at Zero Coalition.
Thanks, David. So the participant list has been shuffling on me. So if I accidentally call someone twice, I apologize. Just to remind everyone, we're doing introductions right now. So just your name and an organization that you represent, if any. Ashley Haight.
Hi, I'm Ashley Haight, Zero Coalition Manager, she, her pronouns. Is that it? Sorry.
That's everything. Thanks, Ashley.
Yep.
Mark Heiser.
Mark Kaiser with Building Codes Division.
Thank you, Mark. Matt Lutter.
Good morning, Matt Lutter with Eugene Water and Electric Board.
Thanks, Matt. Pat Lando.
Pat Lando, Executive Director of Recode.
Thanks, Pat. Stephen Mantiaco. Not hearing you, Stephen. Not hearing you, Stephen. Sorry. Ty Jennings.
Yeah, Ty Jennings representing Cascade Natural Gas. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, like I said, the list has been shifting on me a little bit, but I think I got everyone. If you have not introduced yourself, I would love to hear from you now. I apologize that I missed you. Okay, just in general for both Stephen or anybody else, if there are sound issues throughout this and you're not coming through, you can always email the BCD rules coordinator inbox any sort of feedback you have along the way, anything you want to say that you're not able to say here. You can always email that, and we will get that, and it'll be considered just as much as anything that's said in the meeting today. Okay. Like I said a minute ago, this is the Rulemaking Advisory Committee for the REACH Code adoption process. The REACH Code is an optional above code design like a set of design standards that you can build to under either the commercial or the residential code. In this last legislative session, House Bill 3409 required that the REACH Code be adopted by rule after being approved by the appropriate advisory boards. And so this rulemaking is intended to define the process by which the REACH Code will be adopted by rule. The plan right now would be for that development and adoption to immediately follow what is for the REACH Code, the base code, which is for the commercial code, the OSSC would be the base code. The energy portions of the OSSC would be the base code for the commercial REACH Code. And the energy portions of the ORSC would be the base code for the residential REACH Code. And the plan would be to go through the normal code adoption process for both the OSSC and the ORSC. And then once that is approved by the board, to move from there to developing the REACH Code that would correspond to each of those base codes. During this meeting, it's a relatively short list of issues that we're discussing. The primary one is we would like any sort of feedback from the group that you have on the proposed rule language that's included in the agenda packet. There are also a couple of other items, including the fiscal and economic impact that would be result from the rulemaking, as well as any potential racial equity impacts on the state from the rulemaking that we'd also like any feedback on if you have it. But with that said, I figure we'll just move right on into topic issue 1, which is sort of the meat of the process here. Division seeks feedback on the proposed REACH Code adoption process. The rulemaking proposal for adopting the REACH Codes includes a process that will slightly differ from the base code adoption process that is outlined in OAR 918-008-0020. Under this rulemaking proposal for adopting the REACH Code, the division may provide REACH Code proposal forms that may include but are not limited to proposed language, modeling inputs and assumptions, modeled energy savings, cost impact, incentive program alignment, and standard formatting. The full language of the proposed rule is provided at the end of this packet. Any discussion or feedback would be welcome on the proposed rule language. I should have, before we even got started on that, I should have asked if there's any questions on the process. So if you have any questions on the process, feel free to throw them at me now. Otherwise, if you have any thoughts on that rule language that is in your packet, we would love to hear it. I'm going to try and do this without the hand raise. Just let folks jump in if you want to. But if I may have to, if we end up getting a little bit too wild and crazy, as one is wont to do at 9:30 on a Tuesday, I may resort to hand raising if it becomes necessary. Don.
Hey there, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hey, so just one thing, as someone who's just really sort of trying to track codes in general as they become available, it's always terrific to be able to see modeling inputs and assumptions as well as modeled energy savings. It's also really helpful to actually see the models themselves.
Okay. Thanks,
That's
John. Brock?
Thank you. I just have two language suggestions for the current draft rules. In 2C and in 4, it says may, so the process for adopting either REACH Code may include, or the division may provide REACH Code proposal forms. I think both of those should probably be shall in 2C because that makes it more predictable, which it appeared from the details on the earlier pages that was a desired process or a desired outcome of the rules. And in 4, it says that if a code amendment proposal deviates from the provided form, if you're going to have rule for what happens if the proposal deviates from it. I think the perform has to be provided so that you know whether or not the proposal being submitted is going to deviate from that.
Thanks, Brock. Anybody else have any thoughts, either specific to the language, which is always welcome, or also just sort of broader process thoughts? David.
Yeah, thank you. It's David Heslom. And I might be missing it as I'm trying to read through it, but on the timetable element that I saw in section 3, is there any more specificity in terms of the timing? It says the division shall notify interested persons of the timetable at the start of each reach code proposal solicitation. So I'm just wondering especially about like pre-notification, because in the past, what's been really helpful is if there's a pretty good long lead time before the opening of a proposal period, because it's pretty hard to get a proposal together with all the modeling required if, for instance, there's just a 45-day proposal period and there hasn't been a lot of advance notice. So I might be missing, if anywhere, it talks about scheduling or notification here.
If you don't mind, David, can I push on that for just a second?
Yeah.
In terms of the having lead notice, since the reach code process is going to immediately follow the base code adoption process, would the fact of the ongoing base code adoption process going through and finishing up with the code committee, going to the appropriate board, being approved by the appropriate board, would that not serve as that appropriate lead time?
Yeah, but does it say immediately somewhere in the draft language?
It just says after.
Yeah. Does 3409 provide any guidance there on the timing at all? In terms of did it provide a time limit in which it had to be adopted within?
I don't have the 34 language in front of me, 3409 language. I'm pretty sure it just says has to be adopted in rule.
I'll just double check that. And then the only other part within that I would comment on is the notification, when it says notification to interested parties. Let me go back there. Yeah, number 3, shall notify interested persons of the timetable. One thing the Zero Coalition's been pushing for is trying to broaden the number of folks who get notified. So if there could be, I doubt if that's going to get into rule here, but just to broaden the outreach of how this gets posted for notification, I think would be helpful to increase the public involvement. I'll just try to go scour 3409, see if I find any additional dates or if anybody else sees it. Thanks.
I wonder if I could jump in on this topic as well.
Yeah.
This is Dom McCarter.
But
Yeah, so just in terms of the timing, there are board meetings that happen where the proposed code is brought to those boards, and then there's for example, this year it was the July 18th BCD rulemaking hearing where the codes were sort of put out for final feedback. And then the public was provided till the 28th of July to provide that feedback. And then after that, conceivably, if no feedback was received, then one could expect that the code was basically final. But conceivably, the board could announce that no feedback was received after the rulemaking hearing, and that could mark sort of the end of the process, because if feedback was provided, then we were led to believe that a process could continue. So just to have a clear sort of line marker for when the code adoption process ends would be helpful.
all right, thanks. Any other thoughts on what's in the rule or what's not in the rule or anything else relating to the code adoption process for the residential and commercial reach codes? I'm not seeing any hands. I'm not seeing anybody jumping onto video to jump in. If you are patiently waiting on me seeing your hand and I don't see it, please just turn off your mic and let me know that you have something to say. Otherwise, I'm going to move on to the next topic, but that doesn't mean we can't come back and talk about this more. If you think about something while we're talking about the fiscal and economic impact that's more about the process, we'll have a section at the end where we're all going to go back, and if there's anything that you still want to talk about that we haven't talked about yet, that'll be the time for it. Don't want you to think that this is the last chance to say something, but I do want to keep us moving if we can. Okay, we'll go ahead and move on to topic 2. What are the potential fiscal and economic impacts of this rulemaking? With any rulemaking, the division is required to make particular note of the potential fiscal and economic impact that may result from the new rules. The division is requesting input from the committee on the nature and extent of any fiscal and economic impact that may be caused by this rule. Some examples of potential fiscal or economic impact would be, are there additional costs or requirements on local municipalities? Are there additional costs or requirements on particular types of businesses? Will the new rule require additional training to implement, comply with, or enforce? Will the new rule make particular actions or products more or less expensive? As housing costs continue to increase, will the residential reach code create lower energy bills to offset rising costs? This is just a list of some examples. Any thoughts on fiscal or economic impact that go beyond the items detailed in that list are welcome. Do any members of the committee have any thoughts on the potential fiscal or economic impact of this new rule?
I was just going to say, I think the last question in the bulleted list here is, well, either incomplete or relates more to the actual code itself than it does to the adoption process. But as housing costs continue to increase, will the residential reach code lower energy bills to offset rising costs? I think getting rid of that question mark and saying the rising costs associated with the increased construction costs that result from code compliance. But again, I think that relates more to the rule adoption for the REACH code itself as opposed to the process.
Thanks, Brock.
This is David Heslem.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm just wondering if it helps to make it specific, when it's a fiscal versus an economic impact. From my perspective, the fiscal is when it's affecting government budgets, and economic is when it's affecting private marketplace. But there might be a different definition for different people of what that means. So in this case, to me, it would be like, oh, that first bullet is a fiscal impact. The third one would have fiscal impact. But the rest would be all economic. But I'm not sure if I agree with everybody else in terms of how to interpret fiscal versus economic. Is that a correct way of thinking about that?
I mean, at least for the purposes of the feedback from the committee on this item, we'd be interested in either or. So in terms of like whether or not something falls into a fiscal bucket or an economic bucket in terms of a definition, it's the delineation between the two is less important. Of like, if there's anything that would fall into either of those buckets, we'd want to hear about it. That makes sense.
Sorry, a lot of background noise.
No, this is Pat Landa from Recode. I just wanted to make a comment. A lot of this stuff is focused on energy. Our work in particular works on water, and that's part of the REACH code being adopted here. So if there's any way to include water or resources as a subject matter versus just focusing on energy. There is a savings with energy and water, of course, but yeah, that'd be great.
Thanks, Pat.
To that end, Pat, there's been some good examples from your work showing how adoption of higher water efficiency can actually reduce construction costs, reduce operation costs, but also reduce construction costs. So I think, that should be explored as well, is that there could be other examples within REACH code development where it's actually lowering construction costs. The assumption doesn't always have to be that the elements in here are things that raise construction costs.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Dave. If people don't know, the water demand calculator is exhibiting that, and that's part of the REACH code that was adopted just prior to this rulemaking. And it's in the REACH codes that we're adopting in general. So yeah, thanks, David.
Any other thoughts on the potential fiscal or economic impact of the REACH code adoption process rulemaking? Okay, I'm not seeing any hands, I'm not seeing any videos, so I'm going to go ahead and move on to our topic 3. But again, any thoughts about 1 or 2, feel free to come back in. All right. What are the potential impacts on racial equity in the state? With any rulemaking, the division is required to make particular note of any potential impact on racial equity in the state that might result from the new rules. The division would welcome any input from the committee on the nature and extent of any impact this rule may have on racial equity in Oregon.
Pat Landa with Reach. I think I would just want to highlight what David Heslin brought up earlier, which is I think this committee's or the process's outreach would be critical to demonstrate that there is equity and inclusion and diversion as part of the process, whereas codes don't necessarily describe that. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Pat. Any other thoughts? I'm not seeing anyone. That is all of the planned topics we had for the meeting. I do want to give anybody a chance. If there's anything else that we haven't talked about that you'd like to talk about when it comes to adopting a REACH code, I'd love to hear it now. If there's something that we skipped, that you missed a chance to say earlier and you want to bring it up now, perfect.
Yeah, this is David Heslin again. I wanted to jump back to the economic.
Yeah.
On topic 2 for a second.
Mm-hmm.
That, there could be the analysis of, does the change create, opportunities for Oregon manufacturers of certain products. So as we're thinking more and more about onshoring manufacturing, it's an important thing to keep in mind.
So we got.
There was a recent DEQ study that was just put out that actually showed how the offshoring of our manufacturing of construction products. They were estimating just our construction products imported into Oregon. There are 14,000 people working in modern slavery to produce the products that we're importing from overseas into the United States. And over 60,000 children working in child labor to produce the overseas building products that we're using just in Oregon. So I think if we're thinking about economics associated with anything, and there are things about use of materials, and there are materials that are coming from Oregon where we know we feel like we can trust labor practices, I think that should be something that's taken into account. Thanks.
Thanks, David.
So David, are you suggesting we should have a line item that would be fair trade in this analysis as far as the economic or fiscal impacts?
Yeah, I think it's a socioeconomic impact, but I think it should be recognized as an impact. So it could be fair trade. That would be more expansive than, maybe the protectionist stance I was just talking about, Pat. That would probably be a better way of looking at it.
Yeah, I'll agree. I think it's some good numbers to be able to provide that would show the benefits of some of these REACH codes adoptions.
Yeah, I would encourage everyone to look at that latest DEQ report, though. It's pretty eye-opening.
Thanks. Any additional thoughts on anything we either have or haven't talked about relating to the adopting of a residential or commercial REACH code? Thought I saw your video come up earlier, Brock.
Oh, I'm just going to say that I agree with David's earlier comment about establishing a time frame between when the base code's adopted and the REACH code is adopted for the notice.
In terms of that sort of appropriate amount of notice prior to the opening of a proposal period, what does that look like for folks? Anybody?
I don't understand the question.
Oh, sorry. There was some talk about there being, because of the necessity, like because of the preparing of proposals being somewhat of a lift, having a lead time prior to the opening of a proposal period, where so that people will be noticed that it would be time to start preparing proposals because we're going to start this process in the future. I'm wondering what would be that appropriate lead time.
I'm not sure, but do you have any kind of anecdotal information about how long those proposals take to put together typically?
I don't. Mark or Kelly might. I feel like there's some organizations represented here that have put in proposals in the past that could also potentially shed some light on that.
So this is David speaking from Zero Coalition, having put in proposals. The energy modeling is really what takes the longest. So, and it's mostly setting up what you want to model, and then the iterative nature of that. So, you really want to have at least a couple months to get that work done before you get into the writing of the proposal. So I'm a little torn here because I don't want us to be building in too much extra time to pad on the back end of the base code adoption process. So what I'm trying to figure out in my head at the moment is how can this notice that the reach code process will start be initiated at some point during the base code process, so that once you've hit a certain point in the base code process, that then the reach clock is ticking on the base code process, or sorry, the reach code process starting. Because if maybe I could be informed by BCD staff, but the base code process, typically the aim is for, as I understand, the aim is for code to be adopted in October of a year where it changes, and the boards, usually the latest date the boards have to do their approval work seems to be, in my memory, like May or June of that year. So
yeah, the adoption target is generally October 1. Rulemaking, like the rulemaking timeline means that we have to file for our hearing typically 49 days before our adoption date, or earlier. We did it a little bit earlier this year. And so the board approval has to come before typically we do the board approval prior to filing for that rulemaking hearing. So at least 2 months before adoption, generally a few months before that, because we take, once we're ready to have the board approval happen, we generally will take the next board meeting available. So that's why you often see those May and June board meetings being the approval board meetings, and then the filing for the hearing following shortly after that.
yeah, great. That my mind isn't totally gone yet. I'm remembering the process from prior seasons. So that, to me, like, that's sort of feeling like it'd be great if the notice, at the time the boards were voting to approve the base code, that as soon as possible after that, the notification was going out that, when the reach code process was going to start, to then give people a chance to prepare their proposals well in advance of when the actual proposal window would be.
So potentially something along the lines of, let's say, in June, the board approves either the ORSC or the OSSC proposed by the code committee, doing some sort of notify that is saying that, goes out to folks interested in the REACH code with something along the lines of the board has approved the base code and forwarded it for rulemaking. There will still be a hearing. There's always a chance that some of this might change after the hearing, but it's pretty set at this point if you want to start looking at proposals. Something like that.
Rather than it having be something, I guess what I'm saying is rather than being date specific or day specific, it's like based off that trigger event of board approval.
Okay. Thanks, David.
I don't know what other people think about that.
Pat Landa with Recode. I'm just wondering why you couldn't have an announcement concurrent with the start of the adoption process in general, saying that the REACH code proposals will start, after board approval. That way people can have months concurrent with the rule adoption, base code rule adoption, and not really to slow down the process. So we can kind of just roll from one to another.
We will, based on if the rule language ends up pretty close to what's already in here or something similar, we will have in rule that the REACH code process is going to start after that base code process. The base code process itself is oftentimes around 18 months long. And so sending out the notice that when we kick off the base code process, that at some point in the future, once we have nailed down the base code, I'm not sure that would provide the sort of concrete notice that folks are looking for, as opposed to a notice that is sent out later on in the process once we have the proposed code nailed down.
Yeah, that's fine. I'm on the water side, and I know that we're already looking at the REACH code and rules. So.
Any other thoughts about anything at all relating to residential or commercial REACH code adoption process? And just a reminder, you can always email us after the fact if something comes away 5 minutes after you leave the meeting and you think, oh, I should have said this. Feel free to send us an email at the rules coordinator inbox. All right, I'm not seeing anybody. So I'm going to talk very slowly, but I'm going to be moving towards adjourning the Rulemaking Advisory Committee unless somebody comes in at the last minute and says that there's a whole lot more they want to talk about. I don't want to cut anybody off, but I'm not seeing that person. So I'm going to go ahead and do it and say thank you all so much for showing up. I really appreciate the discussion and the feedback that we've had. And for the third time, feel free to email us at Rules Coordinator Inbox, and we'll be sure to get all of that, any sort of comments that come through that, into the overall package of information we've gathered from this meeting. Again, I really appreciate everybody coming out. Thanks for talking with me about all this.
Thank you for hosting the meeting.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Good day.